how to recognize diseases. Just heard that we're being recorded. It's classified burnout as it's as a diagnosis now and as a syndrome that is very much caused by organizations. So the way that they've classified burnout is to say that burnout is a syndrome conceptualized resulting from chronic workplace stress. And they really do put the emphasis on that it's a workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's different to just normal stress, very different, and we will talk about that as we go through. But it refers specifically to occupational context. And they very clearly say that burnout should not be applied to address other areas of life, which means it's an organizational problem. It's not an individual problem, it's an organizational problem, and we need to be addressing those things that are creating burnout. But before we can address them, we need to recognize what burnout is. It's not just stress that hasn't been successfully managed. There are most definitely signs and symptoms of burnout, and symptoms of burnout can be any mixture or any combination of these three distinct symptoms. So exhaustion, feeling totally depleted mentally and physically, and a constant feeling of fatigue. Cynicism. We can have a cynical detachment so that people, they lose their social connectedness. They're increasingly lacking engagement in the workplace, and they have negative feelings towards the job and the employer. And it may even be aspects of the job that they once enjoyed and that help people to feel motivated. Now they have negative feelings towards that part of the job. And a reduced sense of efficacy. So people losing their sense of value in themselves. The signs of that can likely result in people procrastinating more, having more, finding it more difficult to make decisions. Now, I recognize that these can all be symptoms of all sorts of things, but they are also symptoms when put together. If we can build a good picture of our people, can be signs of burnout. So we need to be looking for these things. The trouble is, I think we recognize the exhaustion one quite well. But if we look at people in the workplace who are cynical, we tend to be a bit less caring, less open to that be a sign of a problem for the individual and the potential sign of a burnout, and more about that individual has now got an attitude or behavioural issues that we need to address in a very different way. But actually, if we recognise, if we can put these dots together and build this greater picture of what's going on for people, then it will help us to identify if there are the potential signs of burnout within our organisation. There was research conducted by Westfield Health in 2022, so earlier this year, and they found that nearly coming up to half the UK workforce feel that they are close to burnout. So 46% of people self-reported that they feel that they are getting close to burnout. The pandemic has had a massive impact on us, on our people across the UK. And research also found that people who've been working from home for the last 18 months to 2 years are also more likely to feel at risk of burnout than people who have gone back to the workplace. So I think it was around 50% of people who work from home feel more likely at risk of burnout, and around 40% of people who are back in the workplace. So that has a massive impact as well. And if we think about those signs and symptoms of burnout, that cynicism includes a lack of social connectedness. So that working from home, while for some people It may be a good idea and it may be quite helpful. For others, we need to be aware, is that lack of social connectedness actually causing a problem and leading towards burnout for people as well? Now, we're Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce. So in Cambridge, there was research that found that Cambridge has the highest number of searches related to burnout online in the UK. I know that I did some of those searches recently, so sorry for that. But there are more searches in Cambridge for burnout than any other area. Second was Oxford and third was Edinburgh. And the interesting thing about that is our top university cities. So I found that quite an interesting statistic as well. I am just going to use the whiteboard now, if I can find it. I'm just going to stop sharing because what I'd like to do is talk about the physical signs, the emotional signs, and the behavioral signs of burnout. Trouble is, I cannot find the whiteboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a Jamboard. So if you don't mind bearing with me very briefly, and then we'll all be able to share and be a little bit more interactive on this. So if we think about burnout as having different signs and symptoms, if we know what to look for in people, then we'll be more able to start having conversations with individuals that will help them to recognize that they have an issue, because a lot of times it can be below the level of our awareness. I know when I talk about stress and mental health issues, a lot of times people are just not aware that they are struggling. So we need to help people to recognize the signs, but we also need to recognize the signs for ourselves. I'm just going to pop in the chat a link to my Jamboard. Some of you might not be able to get across, which is why I'd prefer to use the whiteboard, but I just cannot see the whiteboard option at the moment. So on the Jamboard, this is my lovely way of sharing online so that we can use post-it notes and sticky notes and pretend we've got flip charts and we're walking around the room. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will be able to see a sticky note icon. And on there, if you wouldn't mind, if you think about the potential signs and symptoms of burnout. What does it look like when people are exhausted, when people become cynical, and when people have that reduced efficacy, so that reduced value for themselves? What sorts of things will they be doing? And I've started to see some great ideas coming up. I'm going to move these around because as they land on top of each other. And I'm also going to share this screen as well so that it gets picked up, hopefully. I shall stop that share and share the new screen. So that hopefully the recording will be able to see this. So these are all really good signs. They're not good signs, but they're signs. Yay, I'm glad somebody's come up with quiet quitting, because that is definitely a problem and something that I'll mention later. These are pesky little things as they land on top of each other. See them landing. Yeah, so lots of good ideas here, lots of signs. And some of them, if we think about it, if people are being unkind, being rude, being snappy, we tend to think of that as more of an attitude problem instead of a sign that there's something that we need to have a conversation about here. How can I help that person recognize that they seem to have become quite rude, they're being quite unkind, they're being quite snappy, they're distancing themselves, but actually if they're being rude and snappy, aren't we all just grateful that they're giving us a break instead of having the right conversation, getting frustrated with others? Yeah, working from home more, not realizing that that might actually be part of the problem because that's all part of that withdrawal, that social withdrawal. People procrastinate, reduce performance and effectiveness to do their job. So some of those things, when they're happening, we might think there's an attitude problem. We might think there's a conversation to be had around work performance, and we might see it less as being something that we can proactively raise to somebody's awareness that actually they're not being themselves, that negativity towards everyone and everything. Absolutely. All of those behaviors, if we recognize them as a problem, giving up is a big one. Yep. If we recognize them as a potential sign of burnout, then we can have a supportive conversation. If we don't recognize them as a sign of potential burnout, then we might be having a very different conversation about somebody's need to change their behaviors or their attitude so that they're being less disruptive within the team and more productive. And that is just going to add to the cynicism, going to add to the exhaustion and add to the withdrawal and stop people feeling that they can talk about what's going on for them. Quiet quitting is about people who just disengage and do just enough to get by. I'm going to do just enough right now to keep my job and no more. And that goes in line with that cynicism side of things. And, in my mind, I think hopefully people quietly quit before they get to burnout so that they don't actually burn out. And maybe they'll be able to disengage for long enough to replenish their energies, but unfortunately, chances are they're not going to because that cynicism just feeds itself of doing just enough to get by. Thank you, everybody, for engaging in that. For anyone who couldn't get onto the Jam board, because I know that sometimes there are too many people and it doesn't let too many people on. Oh, yeah, another good one's come up there. Doubting their ability to do the job. Absolutely. People who were once very able to problem solve, able to do their job, able to make quick decisions, suddenly start doubting themselves and suddenly seem to need more reassurance. So they're constantly checking in with their manager. They constantly check in. How do I do this? Have I done this right? How would you do it? They get stuck and they find it difficult to make decisions for themselves. And again, it's about changes in behavior. If this is a new thing, people have suddenly appeared to become more needy, that's a sign they're not coping and potentially moving down that trajectory towards burnout. So, just going to stop sharing the Jamboard and go back to sharing my slides. I can get my slides up. So, there's a difference between stress and burnout, but prolonged stress leads to burnout. So, you may have seen this bell curve before. This is called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And the Yerkes-Dodson law talks about the relationship between pressure and performance. And we all need a healthy amount of pressure. And anyone who's been to any of my talks about stress knows that I talk about the pressure to get out of bed, to be somewhere at a certain point in the morning or in the day. We do the things that we need to do that gets us out of bed, gets us dressed, gets us ready for where we need to be. So we're managing that. But the Yerkes-Dodson law says that if there's too much pressure or for too long, we have an optimum level of pressure. But if that continues for too long, then we get to this place of exhaustion, which is one of the signs of burnout. If that carries on for a long time, moves us into that anxiety, panic, anger, potentially moving into that cynicism and that lack of self-efficacy, and we get to that breakdown and that burnout stage. This is individual for everybody. In terms of stress, we talk about hypo-stress, where there isn't enough stress, there isn't enough pressure. People don't feel a purpose, a need to get out of bed in the mornings. That in itself can lead to depression. And this inactivity, so too little stress, underload, or hypo-stress. Then there's eustress, which is EU stress, which is the good level, the optimum, the yellow level, or this second quadrant. Then there's hyperstress, where we're moving through and we're getting to that too much stress, that overload, and that place of burnout. So we need to be aware of the levels of stress that our people can take. It's individual for everybody. Life events happen to people as we go through life. Things might happen that mean, whilst my optimum stress level, my eustress in, I don't know, July was very different to what it is now because of life events and things that have happened. Be that now, if people are going through life changes or if there's something going on for them, it doesn't take much to tip them over. There's an organisation that I've done some wellbeing assessments for their people. So I offer 20-minute check-ins. I get them to do some wellbeing questionnaires before I see them, which measures signs of anxiety, depression, and well-being. And in that 20 minutes, we can identify where people are in terms of stress and hopefully give them some quick wins. So I had a wellbeing assessment with somebody yesterday who I had worked with previously. She asked for a wellbeing assessment and she'd been doing really well when we worked together and finished working together last year. But what's happened for her and what's changed for her now is that she's going through a divorce. So she's just left the family home 2 weeks ago. And that means the level of pressure that she can take right now is a lot less than the level of pressure that she could take in July last year when we were working together. Because she's got this other stuff going on that already puts her high on that pressure curve. And it doesn't take much in the workplace to push her over. So we'll be doing some work together to help get her back on an even keel as quickly as possible. So managers need to know their people, need to know what's going on for them. And I know there are still a lot of people who think that we should be leaving this stuff at home. But actually, home and work have become very blurred, and we are human beings. You can't just drop part of who you are and what's going on for you just because you happen to be at work. So it's really important that managers recognise where their people are and the amount of pressure that people can take and what it is that might push them through. We can experience stress without being burned out. Stress in and of is not a sign of burnout. Beginning to not cope with life, feeling stressed is very different to being burned out. When we're burned out, we just feel empty, feel hopeless, just beyond the point of caring. When we feel stressed, we may still want to achieve and want to get through this. So burnout is a very different thing to stress in and of itself. But prolonged stress leads to burnout. So I'd like to think about if you work in an organisation that actually celebrates burnout. There are certain behaviours that take us to that place of being stressed, that overpressure, that expectation to overperform maybe. So if we go back onto the Jamboard, I have just set up another frame. So at the top, if you're still seeing the yellow post-it notes, at the top it says frame 1 of 2 or 2 of 2. And if you press the left arrow, you'll get to a second Jamboard that's a clear one with a grey background. And I'd like to ask you now if you could put up there again using the sticky notes, and you can change the colours of the sticky notes. Don't have to stick with yellow if you don't want to. What behaviours are celebrated in your workplace that ultimately can result in burnout? If we're talking about burnout as being an organisational issue, let's think about what your organisation does that celebrates burnout. And again, I will share the new screen. Again, I'm moving them around so that they don't land on each other. There's there's a theme going on here, isn't there? Always on. And how we measure commitment. Yep. Ooh, hyper competitive, that's horrible. Yeah, we recognize that people have gone the extra mile and we hold those people up as, how do we all go the extra mile? Well, how about we all stop trying so hard with the resources we've got, boasting about, like, yeah, yep, working through your lunch break. I used to do that a lot in HR. Setting and hitting unrealistic targets. I think one of the things that happened when we went into lockdown and people were furloughed, um, some organisations were furloughing part of their teams and then keeping other parts of their teams on, but the smaller part of the team was still expected to deliver the same amount as the full team were delivering previously. So the targets had changed, and that meant people really had to overperform. Yep, absolutely. Making up for other people's poor performance. So we accept other people's poor performance and we think, right, I need to do more. Some of this might be an individual thing. Some of it could be that people are putting those pressures and those expectations on themselves. I still think managers have a responsibility to recognize when that's going on within their organization and for their people. And that when they recognize that, managers should be explaining to their people that this is unhealthy and making sure that they are not picking up that slack and they're not over delivering and overperforming. Because basically, when you get back into a point of, okay, this is what we can do within the timeframes, when we go back to that, suddenly you're seen as underperforming because you've been overperforming, but that overperformance takes you at that the wrong end, Yerkes-Dodson curve. Yeah, micromanagement can be really frustrating for people as well, and that can lead to cynicism for sure. Why should I do it if you're going to look over my shoulder and tell me how to do it? Why should I think for myself? But we have all of these kind of behaviors. We can have that always on, which means that we're working longer hours. Two-quadrant authoritative management style and culture, absolutely. So having that management style, managers are hugely important for maintaining good employee health, well-being, and good behaviours. But if managers are actually, if their style isn't very approachable, or it's quite bullying at times, or they're just not trained, they don't understand the management role, they don't understand the need to actually achieve more through their people rather than taking on and holding on to things, because sometimes managers hold on to all the good stuff as well. So it's making sure that your managers are well trained. Also, lack of clarity in roles, excessive demands from the top, yeah, massive expectations. And that lack of understanding of what is possible and what isn't. Recently watched the program about Elon Musk, and one of the things that someone said in that, When he worked at Tesla, his family didn't get much of a look in because Elon Musk works super long hours, so everybody else is expected to do the same. But actually, Elon Musk is the top of that pile and he's a billionaire. Everyone else isn't. He's doing it for himself. They're doing it for different reasons. And we need to, especially small businesses and business owners, need to move away from the idea that the people who work for them are going to be as committed to, oh, nice one, as committed to their company as they are. We should never expect our employees to be as committed as the business owners or the people at the top. They can be committed, but those at the top get higher rewards and they're in it for a very different reason. I like this. So that having high control culture and low support culture, then it becomes punitive and authoritarian. But having the high support culture and the high control culture, then it's restorative and authoritative. So you're doing things with people. I like that. Thank you for sharing that, whoever shared that. That's great. So you can see that when we talk about World Health Organization recognizing burnout as an organizational issue and saying that we don't burn out through any other areas of our lives, these are the kinds of behaviors and the kind of cultures that exist that create that place of burnout. And it's not just the people that burn out. If that carries on for too long, the organization, there is such a thing as organizational burnout. The organization can end up falling off a cliff as well. Stop sharing that and I will start sharing my slides again. Bear with me 1 second as that. Pretend that was seamless. So how do we deal with this? So the best cure for burnout is preventing it. Hopefully we don't have to pick up that there is an issue and there's a cultural issue, and if there is, then we really do need to deal with it. But prevention, putting these things in place before people burn out rather than after, is always going to be the best. And the way that we can do that, check your business culture, assess the risk areas. Where are the risk areas? Can you identify how your organization celebrates burnout? We've had some really good answers on that Jamboard. But people being expected to pick up stuff while they're on holiday, people being expected to always be on, people being expected to, take that authoritative approach to work through their lunch, to never fully shut off. People actually being rewarded for putting in that extra mile, for always being available. And then there's that sense of boast. I'm going to boast about I don't log on during my holidays, and actually I'm here and I'm sick, and we should all be here when we're sick, and all of that stuff that just creates a culture that says you're not allowed to be human, you're not allowed to be you. Leave your humanness behind, and just I want you to be a robot. I want you to deliver. We're not robots. We need to be our full selves and not to mask what's really going on for us. Sometimes it's an organization-wide issue. Sometimes it might be departmental. It may be that there's quite a toxic head of a department or head of a division, and that creates that culture in that department or that division of the business, but the rest of the organization might be okay. You might recognize it if you have more sickness absence in a particular department, if you have a lot more people leaving more quickly, you get a revolving door, and it's only in one department, quiet quitting in a particular department or division. But assess the risk, know what's going on in your organization. Having clarity within roles, that didn't come up on the Jamboard, but people who have a lack of clarity in terms of their role and their responsibilities, that can lead to that place of burnout. That can lead to that cynicism and that inefficacy rather, that happens. Having unclear communication lines, not addressing issues around workload, not addressing issues around conflict in the workplace, all of those things. So we need to assess, what are the issues in our organisation and where do they sit? Is it across the business, or is it in certain areas within the business? And then we need to be aware of, how do we create an environment of psychological safety? And psychological safety it's a term that was coined in the 60s actually, and her name will come to me, or it will come to me later. There was Dr. Amy, sorry Amy, can't remember your last name, it will come to me later, who identified that there are 4 stages of psychological safety. So we can have inclusion safety. So that's where everybody feels able to be part of the team. They're comfortable being present. They don't feel excluded in certain situations. They feel like they're wanted and their input is appreciated. I was recently working with a coaching client who has an issue around inclusion safety because of his previous employer, and how he felt out on a limb and basically hung out to dry with a previous employer where they had basically set him up to fail. But that was a hangover, and he was bringing that into his current organisation. Without inclusion safety, we can't move on to stage 2 of psychological safety and have what's known as learner safety. And that learner safety allows people to ask questions. It allows people to make mistakes and to own them and to say, oh, I've made a mistake here. How do we get out of this? How do we deal with this? If we create environments where people are allowed to own their mistakes and we don't have a blame culture, that brings greater creativity. And there's a lot of research carried out into this area where it was found that if we have psychologically safe working environments, people feel that they can own their mistakes and they feel that they can be completely honest and they can learn as they go through, and they don't have to hide, blame. They're allowed to just learn and grow. And when we allow our people to learn from their mistakes, because it's a natural thing to do, then they can grow and deliver their best. They don't then suffer with that sense of low self-efficacy. They're able to deliver their best and be their best because they're allowed to make mistakes. Then we have contributor safety. And contributor safety is where people feel that they can contribute and that their contributions are valid and accepted by the rest of the team and welcomed. And they're not poo-pooed, they're not edited by other people, they're told why they're wrong. So they're safe to contribute their own ideas, they will not be ridiculed. And it's a more challenging state than before, because actually allowing people to put forward their ideas, to volunteer their own ideas, that takes a level of sense of safety and security in the work environment to be able to contribute and to show our vulnerability in front of other team members. It was Dr. Amy Edmondson who came up with this 4 stages, who identified these 4 stages. And she has some great she's got a great website. So if you Google Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, you'll find a lot of information on this. Then the 4th stage of psychological safety is challenger safety, where people feel that it's okay to challenge. They're allowed to challenge ideas and contributions in a supportive way. I call that being the critical friend. So the critical friend is the friend who can tell you what you need to hear, in a friendly way. So they can give you that critical feedback, but they're not doing it to pull you down. They're doing it to help raise you up. So that challenger safety includes being able to challenge people in a place of authority and to challenge ideas and to suggest significant changes to things. So this is an area where we deliver various levels of training and various areas of training to help address these areas in organisations. I recently ran a workshop. There were two workshops that I ran. The first one was a lunch and learn where I introduced the concept of respectful conversations in science. Anyone who works in a science background will know where we're coming from there. In the sciences, it's okay to challenge and to dig and to look at people's ideas, because you're always looking at why wouldn't this work and how do we make it work? But the way that challenge comes across can be quite scathing at times and can appear to pull people down. So I developed an introduction to respectful conversations and then advanced respectful conversations. So the first was a lunch and learn and the second was a half day where we got people actually sitting down and recognizing their approaches to conflict and how can they create a greater understanding and greater working relationships by improving their communication and the way that they gave this negative feedback in a way that was a lot less damaging and more supportive. We then have a need to ensure that everybody has a voice. Everybody feels included at work. Everybody has the same level, the same opportunities. We respect diversity. We accept people as they are. We don't expect people to mask, and we don't expect people to cover up aspects of themselves that they feel will be damaged or not be accepted by being true to themselves in the workplace. So we have a definite approach to dignity at work where we encourage people to think about the impact their behavior can have on others. And we talk a lot in that about banter, and I bring in case law where banter has gone wrong, where people have thought they were having a laugh with their colleagues, but actually their colleagues were being damaged by this idea of banter. And we always get some really good feedback from that. Some organisations have now made that mandatory that all staff come on a dignity at work with us. But it's half a day. And again, it's about getting people to think and reflect on themselves, the impact they can have on others, and how they can be more open and more willing to accept people just as they are. Then it's important that managers have the skills to be able to identify these signs and these symptoms, but not only identify the signs and symptoms of burnout in their colleagues, but also to think about how do they initiate supportive conversations in a helpful way, and how do they create a culture where everybody can talk about their well-being so that they can pick up really early when there's too much pressure for people and they are moving towards that place of burnout. So again, prevention, we're stopping people getting to burnout. We can pick it up when it is stress and we can help them to manage that, and we can give them the right support. So we run 3 half-day sessions, and these are generally 3 or 4 weeks separate from each other, that builds management skills. I'm running it at the moment for an organisation online. My preference is that we're in person, but it's an organisation, so we have people from all around the world. 3 half days, building skills. The first one is about awareness of the signs, symptoms, and the issues. The second half day is about the barriers, what gets in the way of you initiating a conversation. Let's deal with those barriers. And the third one is about creating a culture where from day one, people know it's okay to say they're not okay. In that way, we can help pick up people who join us who may not be in the right headspace and in a good place. There are case studies that I share with people in that, and there's one case of somebody who was incredibly unwell. But when she joined the organisation, she was already in the depths of her depression and nobody knew. And because she kept herself to herself, she was very withdrawn, she was kind of unapproachable. Nobody did anything, nobody knew, there were no interventions, and that didn't have a good outcome at all. So it's really important from day one that people recognise it's okay to talk about what's going on for you and get the help that you need. The client who I do the wellbeing assessments for, they make those available to all new staff once every 6 months. So I do twice a year, 2 days a year for them. Then making sure that you have motivation, upskill your managers to coach their people. This Dan Pink does a really good TED talk about motivation. He talks about how we need to give people autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and that keeps us motivated. If we think about that sign of burnout being cynicism, people being demotivated, and we're getting that quiet quitting where people are just stepping back. Your managers being able to recognize that and to recognize, do these people need more autonomy, so less micromanagement? Do they want more mastery? Is that going to motivate them? Or do they need a sense of purpose? Do they need to reconnect with the purpose of the organization, the purpose of the department that meets their goals and the organizational goals? For this, we do a 12-month management program, which some of you will be aware of because I've spoken about it previously. But in this, we teach managers from day one coaching skills, and we encourage managers from day one to apply coaching skills with their people throughout the 12 months. Coaching is a huge part of it. Emotional intelligence is the main thread throughout. So it results in greater empathy, greater confidence, and greater problem-solving skills in managers, and the ability to deal with conflict and to support their people as individuals throughout. Our 12-month management program recently, one of our organisations that we work with called Alstone Medical, they recently received a Judge Business Institute award for their approach to management training in the science arena. And they credit a lot of that to, they've built the whole program around this 12-month program. So they do a introduction to, then we do the 12 months for people who move into management, and then there's coaching for their senior leaders. And it's a really good joined up approach to supporting managers. And sometimes going through the program, it becomes clear that this person's a scientist, they're not a manager, and it's okay to say, I don't want to do this, I can't take this on. That's okay. That for me is still a win. It would have been better if they'd have had the conversation before they went on the program, but if they get the realization when they're on it, all good stuff. Then self-care. Self-care is so important, and we need to encourage and reward self-care, not reward those behaviors that say to people, don't take your whole holiday. When you're on holiday, you need to be available to me. That's not self-care. If people are on holiday, they're on holiday, leave them be. So if we can create an organisation, an environment where we reward behaviours for looking after yourself, where people have healthy boundaries, that they don't feel that they need to join in this game of I'm doing more than you, or doing that boastful, I'm going to go back to the Jamboard, that open all hours and boasting about logging on during holidays or being at work while they're sick, and being overly flexible. If people don't have healthy boundaries that says, okay, I know that this is important, but I'm important too. As a therapist, in my training, we talk about you cannot pour from an empty cup. I have to look after myself to be available for my clients. So making sure that I'm fully resourced means I have the resources to deliver to you. Your people making sure that they're fully resourced means they have the resources to deliver for you and to meet these targets. We do a 6-week stress management program that it's an hour and a half a week over 6 weeks. And it's very much about helping people recognize the behaviors that can get in the way of self-care and helping them to understand how they can adjust and adapt their behaviors to be able to deliver for themselves as well as the organization. Then we need to really increase awareness of mental health across the organization and have that acceptance that we all have mental health, and it can be on a continuum. We can be in a good place, we can be in a bad place, but we all have mental health, same as we all have physical health. And I'm surprised by how often I still see, especially in the media, talk about, well, tell me about a time when you had mental health. We've all got it. Why are we talking about it as if it's a thing that only happens when we're not in a good place? Improving awareness of mental health issues is really key. So we run mental health first aid training from Mental Health First Aid England, mental health awareness training. There's lots of different ways of approaching this, but you need to create that culture and you need to have an awareness of what's available, and you need to be able to support your people effectively and fully. And talking openly about mental health and well-being is really important. We're kind of coming up to the end now. It's 10:02. So prevention is better than cure. Encouraging your people to have a good work-life balance, to not say, okay, if I work here, that means that my home life will struggle. So I'll do it for a couple of years and then I'm out of here. Like the people who worked, who were interviewed on the Elon Musk program, where they were saying, yeah, my family life took a back seat while I was there. So at some point they need to go, and you could be losing really good top talent because it's unsustainable practices for the individual, but also for the business. So if you're promoting good working practices and good living practices, then you'll be supporting your people to be able to be their best and deliver the best while they're with you, but also to have their best life when they're not at work as well. The more we enjoy our lives outside of work, the more we bring into work, quite honestly. That is the end of the session. So over to you. Are there any questions from anybody? I haven't been looking at the chat to know if questions have come in. Anybody got any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put something in the chat. She'll take that as a no, as nothing's coming up. You can see here my contact details. So I am on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect on LinkedIn, please do. If you'd like to email me, Jacqui with a Q at yourpotential.co.uk. If anyone wants to hang around and ask questions at the end when it feels a bit more private, then I'm more than happy to do that as well. Zoe, are you still here?
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
I will send out the slides as well, Jacqui, if you want to get them to me, and I'll send them
Thank you
to everyone. And
yep.
The recording will obviously be made public as well, so I'll send the link out to you too.
Brilliant.
So you can send it to all your people at work.
Yes, yeah, and your managers who are maybe part of the problem. Any questions at all? If not, then we've finished a few minutes early. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
And hope to see you. When's the next event, Zoe? Do you know?
I think for this sort of thing, we're done for the year.
2022, yeah.
Christmas events face-to-face in December, so you can see them on our website. We've got the normal informal networking events in the evenings as well, but yeah, we're coming to the end now.
Yeah, that's and actually I think about this year in February, I did a talk about how to prevent burnout, but from a slightly different perspective, well, very different perspective. So it's a bit sad that we're still talking about it. So it's still an issue, and it's a bigger issue than it was back then. So thank you everybody for joining. Just had a thank you from someone individually, so thank you, you're welcome. Hope you found it useful. If you do want to get in touch, my contact details are there. Hope you all have a good end to the week and a good end to the year.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Right.
Stop the recording.
Let me stop sharing.